All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Hillary Goldstein, and I'm the Public Programs Coordinator at the New York Transit Museum. This virtual presentation is part of a series of online experiences that we are hosting throughout the year. Our virtual public programs include conversations, presentations, workshops, and performances hosted by the Transit Museum, and often drawing from our internal archives, collections, and exhibitions. Tonight's program is a special collaboration with Coney Island, USA, the Coney Island Museum, and the Coney Island Brewery. Tonight is all about Coney. Before we head to the show, I'd love to tell you a little bit about us. The New York Transit Museum started as an exhibition in the 1976 bicentennial. It was so popular, it became a permanent museum in the 1980s. We're located in a decommissioned IND subway station in downtown Brooklyn. We also have a gallery and shop in Grand Central Terminal. Our programs have gone virtual since the pandemic began, but even though the museum is now open, we're continuing to host these online programs on a variety of topics and for a variety of ages. This format allows us to engage with museum and transit fans from all around the world. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, I'd like to note that if you would like closed captions, you can click where it says CC Live Transcript at the bottom of your screen and select Show Subtitle. If you don't see that option, click the More button with 3 dots, and you should see more meeting setting options. We're going to ask everyone to keep your microphones muted, but please feel free to use the chat to ask questions, to talk amongst yourselves, and time permitting, we will have time for Q&A at the end of our program. All right, so first up, we're going to go back in time, back to when Coney Island was simply an island. We'll be exploring how evolving transportation options helped shape Coney Island's development from resort for the wealthy into the people's playground. So here to lead us through this history is New York Transit Museum's educator and experience facilitator, Joe Hartman. Joe has been an educator and performer with the New York Transit Museum for the past 5 years and has led digital discussions on the evolution of Grand Central Terminal, the luxury train, the 20th Century Limited, as well as a full-length discussion on the relationship between Coney Island and New York Transit. Here to give us a segment of that talk is Joe Hartman.
Hi, everybody. I am Joe Hartman, and as I said, as Hillary said, it's good to start at close to the beginning as we can give you kind of an overlay of Coney Island itself and some basic background information. So to assist with that, we have this map of Coney Island as it was in 1879. I think you can see my cursor here. I'm going to point out some things. It's in the borough of Brooklyn, New York, was originally an island just off the southern coast of the mainland, separated by Coney Island Creek, which is this little windy creek right here. And on the other end, it is separated by the Atlantic Ocean, which is right here. And it was connected by landfill. That's land reclamation, not what we think of landfill with like garbage going in there. It reclaimed the land in the 20s and 30s and made it a peninsula. Today, we generally think of Coney Island as the portion to the west of Ocean Parkway. That's this big area right here. So usually we think of this as Coney Island, which is where the amusement parks were centered. And that's known as the West End or as West Brighton. And I'll be using both of those terms to describe it today. But back in the day, that was just one of 3 major areas, which was collectively considered Coney Island. From west to east, they are the West End, West Brighton, which appealed to the working class essentially. Then what became known as Brighton Beach, which was working to appeal to the middle classes and upper middle classes. And finally, Manhattan Beach, which targeted the elite. Another area that we need to make mention of, and it's good to be aware of, is Coney's Western Point, also known as Coney Island Point. And that is this area all the way to the left of the map here. It would later be known as Norton's Point, which will have an important part to play in our story. So here we're looking at an antique stereoscope photo, which shows 2 photos of these 3 rather well turned out, well, 4. One of them is like a little footstool. So 4 very well turned out bathers who epitomize the wealthier types that were targeted to frequent the beach in its earlier days. The island's location and lack of significant obstructions meant that virtually the entire beach was in sunlight all day. This made it the perfect place to try out what was in 1823 a pretty new fashionable activity. It was called saltwater bathing. And that really was beginning to draw people to the area. But to add to that, to make it a destination, what they needed was an official way to cross this creek, which earlier to that, it was shallow enough you could cross it at points, wading, or the Lenape people earlier had used canoes to get to the island. They'd go for clams. But this was an official way. It was a toll road, and it was surfaced with crushed shells, built in 1829, and it was appropriately named, wait for it, Shell Road. And that also urged the opening of the first hotel, and that was Coney Island House later that same year. And this began Coney's summer resort business. And since Shell Road was only for carriages, that was really limiting the visitors to the upper classes at that point. Now, steamships were the island's first public transportation, bringing irregular service to its westernmost point, that point I mentioned earlier, Coney Island Point, beginning around 1845. And these were small operations, kind of like sea taxis. The relative isolation of the area made for an air of permissiveness at Norton's Point, and gambling and drinking and prostitution began finding a place here. And a lot of this activity would be centered on a hotel owned by Mike Norton, who would gain dominance over the area and lead it to be called Norton's Point, which was that other name that I mentioned. Now, these activities were bumping up against families and middle-class citizens who were also heading to Coney Island for family fun. And they're arriving on steamships docking at this point at the same time. Now, by the 1870s, larger ships made the scene. 1879 is going to see an alternative pier to the one at Norton's Point, much closer to the West End, and more would follow. By 1881, we see the arrival of the most notable of the operations, Andrew Culver's the Iron Steamboat Company. Now, the company started with a fleet of 7 ships, providing regular service to the area, all named after stars or constellations. And they would continue to provide service till the end of season in 1932, because Coney Island had about 2 months in the summer, which was considered its season. One of the things contributing to the company's longevity were very savvy practices that they had, like they arranged for exclusive docking rights on certain piers. They had relationships with railroads, offering one way by rail and one by ship. And in 1905, they developed a relationship with Dreamland Amusement Park, and purchasers of round-trip tickets by steamship would get free admission to Dreamland. And this would later be worked out with Steeplechase Park. Now, in this image, we see the Iron Steamboat Company, one of their ships, the Cepheus. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. It's named after the constellation which represented King Cepheus, husband of Cassiopeia, father of Andromeda. And if any of you have seen Clash of the Titans, that rings a bell, or if you're fans of Greek myths, either one. Now, when railroad service first came to New York City, it was in the form of horse car lines, serviced by horse-drawn cars on rails. And in the image, we have an example of a later horse car, just for an idea of what they looked like. And in 1862, in the midst of a civil war, the Coney Island and Brooklyn Railroad began service to the island on July 4th. This is a really popular day for opening ceremonies, July 4th. More notable operations would follow than the Coney Island and Brooklyn Railroad, but this is a landmark achievement to making Coney Island available for the masses, a really big deal. Now in 1864, the Brooklyn, Bath, and Coney Island Railroad began service. It also started as a horse car, but it quickly transitioned to a steam engine line. And in 1867, it became the first steam railroad to reach Coney Island. It's going to be several years, though, before the railroad boom that would be instrumental to making Coney Island the icon it is today. And one thing that needed to happen for this big boom on Coney Island with all this, the railroads coming in, is we needed to have an end to the Civil War. And when we did, a lot of these developers who got wealthy out the Civil War, a lot of them railroad owners, were seeing a big profit possibilities in the beachfront properties. And so they began to race to buy this land at beachfront locations on Coney Island. and secure the rights for rail use to the land that they'd purchased. And what they would do is they would build these big terminals on this property and a nearby luxury hotel and resort center. And this way, they made money on passengers who were traveling to Coney Island. So they would have this rail and they would get money through the fare to Coney Island. And they would also have a central location on their property where these new incoming people could spend all their money. Not only that, they could often get rights to that route, and then they could leverage that against people who own properties and did not have the control over the means to get there. Now, in the image, we can see number 4, a steam locomotive of the Prospect Park and Coney Island Railroad at Culver Depot. And Andrew Culver, he is the owner of the Prospect Park and Coney Island Railroad, as well as that steamship company, the Iron Steamship Company that we mentioned earlier. And he also followed this model. His railroad was the first of the larger, more efficiently run railroads bringing service starting in 1875. It terminated at Culver Depot near his development in the West End, named Culver Plaza. Really simple names in Coney Island. A lot of them. You'll get some much more elaborate ones later when we come to the amusement park era. Sorry, that is number 4 from Prospect Park. Forgive me. Now, the 2 hotels that we see side by side here were the 2 grandest hotels of what would be considered the resort era. And this major period of development brought about the era of the luxury resort. There were no more lavish resorts than those owned by Austin Corbin. In 1875, he purchased a 500-acre property at the east end of Coney Island that he named Manhattan Beach. And as we talked about earlier, that is going for the most elite, the people who would come down for the entire season, bring their entire entourage of people, their entire household, and just kind of plop down and spend tons of money. So he's going for them. And the Manhattan Beach Hotel opened July 4th, 1877, popular date, as I mentioned. His second hotel, the Oriental Hotel, was equally lavish. And these 2 hotels would dominate the scene alongside the Brighton Beach Hotel, which is in the area just to the west of there, and it catered to the slightly less affluent. The final syndicate, which provided rail transport to the island, would be the New York and Sea Beach Railroad. And that began its service in 1879 and had claim to a route 15 minutes faster than any other at the time. And they terminated at their Sea Beach Palace Hotel in West Brighton. There were a lot of beautiful hotels. I don't have time to show pictures of all of them, but just because you don't see these hotels here, and those 2 that we mentioned were the grandest, there were a lot of really beautiful establishments here. Now, around this time, the West End was dominated by a man named John Y. McCain. He held a huge amount of power in the area for just under 25 years, and he accepted bribes and kickbacks and granted licenses to brothels and gambling establishments and saloons, businesses that could not get these licenses in Brooklyn proper. And a lot of his established practices gave Coney Island this nickname, Sodom by the Sea. And it was a reputation that started to keep respectable people away in droves. Here we see a picture of Coney Island as it looked in 1890, and it's hard to miss the famous Elephantine Colossus, which is right here. It was a novelty building that started out as a concert hall and observatories, but eventually it became the domain of prostitutes. Not necessarily officially, but there was a lot of business taking place there. So in the 1890s, New York saw massive population growth to more than 3 million New Yorkers. Many of them were from Europe. They were drawn by new opportunities here, but they were brought up short by the realities of city life. So we have, what we imagine it will be, and then what we're actually brought face to face with when our dream becomes a reality. And 1.5 million of New York's population lived in the tenements and slums, in extremely cramped quarters and sweltering summer heat. And Coney Island offered an escape for many of them. They would be assisted by increasing low expense transit options, bringing more than 250,000 visitors on summer Sundays. But when we're talking about the poorest of the poor, it is going to take some further changes to make Coney Island accessible to them, to make it really accessible to everyone. Now, mechanical entertainments had been available at Coney Island since the 1880s, but it took a former daredevil by the name of Paul Boynton to come up with this idea to open an enclosed park with a wide variety of these mechanical attractions, all at one price. His Sea Lion Park featured shows with trained sea lions who he had worked with before, and it opened on July 4th, 1895, inspiring an entire industry, that of the amusement park. Now, the amusement park era coincided with a big overhaul by the people of Coney Island to bring back tourists after the departure of McCain. McCain was jailed in Sing Sing eventually for his practices. And if you want to think of something, think of the overhaul to Midtown in the 1990s. And developer and longtime Coney Island resident George C. Tillieu really helped to lead this movement. He had an eye to offering entertainment that was suitable for all. He opened Steeplechase Park in 1897, which we mentioned earlier, unofficially in conversation. And he walked a really fine line because what he did was he's built this family-friendly environment and got a reputation for having a family-friendly environment, but he also featured attractions specifically designed to give men and women socially acceptable ways to touch, like the human roulette pictured above. The other notable parks at the time were Luna Park, which opened in 1903, and Dreamland in 1904. Coney Island at this time offered kind of an escape from society's norms and where we're all feeling buttoned up and we have to watch what we're doing because we're so crowded and we have to be, well, normal, I guess, for lack of a better term. But this, Coney Island lets us to let loose, kind of to let our hair down. And Hugh Ryan's book he wrote this really beautiful book called When Brooklyn Was Queer, and I'd like to quote from it a little bit. He said that Coney Island at this time catered, quoting, to middle and working class consumers, marketing themselves as family-friendly areas where people of all classes, ethnicities, and races could mix. On October 27th, 1904, New York officially began subway service with fares of just a nickel. Just like Coney Island, the subway service offered ease of mobility to everyone, allowing all types of people to interact and influence each other's lives. The BRT would extend service to Coney Island beginning on June 22nd, 1915. Now, this was at the price of 10 cents, with trains running between Coney Island and Chambers Street in Lower Manhattan. In 1919, a completely reconstructed new West End terminal was built on an elevated structure, seen here in the image taken from a postcard. And it consolidated the terminals of all the former steam lines terminating at Coney, except, this is a notable exception, for the New York and Manhattan Beach Railway, and it would become known as the Stillwell Avenue or Coney Island Station. On May 1st of 1920, the extension of the Culver line to the Stillwell station brought an end to the BRT's double fare policy for those going to Coney Island, and it was the final equalizer. And in June of that year, 350,000 visitors were reported on a single day. And within a few years, you could see as many as 1 million visitors on a sunny Saturday in 1923. And this brought back the focus to the pleasure of bathing in the saltwater, because you have a lot of people who cannot necessarily afford some of the higher priced foods. And so there would be a drop in prices for the food that was offered. There would also be, there would be access made to the public and construction of the boardwalk in 1923. And that would draw people away from the amusement parks more toward the beach itself. And this focus of taking pleasure in bathing in the saltwater of the Atlantic Ocean. Because for so many, the now affordable ability to join this pastime really feels like a piece of the American dream made real, because you have to think how prevalent Coney Island was in popular culture and in the zeitgeist at that time. It was the place to be. And if you're someone who is struggling to live in New York and you hadn't been able to come here before, and now you can get your family here for this bit of escape, it's really a beautiful thing. In the coming years, Coney Island would go through many changes. The Depression would bring the loss of half of the island's attractions. And during World War II, Coney Island would become an important morale booster, with soldiers and sailors on leave flooding the boardwalk, contributing to a feeling of patriotism. In fact, in 1943, Coney experienced a record season with the visitor numbers reaching 46 million. So business owners would really have, it would be understandable that they'd be excited for the future. But things came into decline. There were some things that were working against Coney Island around this time. And in the 1950s, the city turned its attention to car owners. There was a lot of money from the government that was put into the highway. And people like Robert Moses helped to bring a decline to the area. And many businesses closed, and Stillwell Station by the 1960s was reflecting disrepair, and despair, I would say. It's very different from the way it looked originally. In these photos we're seeing, these are by Larry Reciopo. I would just like to highlight his work. He has some beautiful photos of Coney Island's beauty and some of its decay of glamour. Some attractions when are coming down, and also beautiful images of is it Astro Land? Maybe someone from Coney Island Museum can help me out later with that one from the 1960s. So one of the characteristics that epitomizes Coney Island, its spirit and its people, is the tenacity. And there was a big revitalization of the area, which began occurring by groups like Coney Island USA, and it's been seen in celebrations like the Mermaid Parade, which you can see an image of here. On December 23rd, 1992, there was a contract awarded for $21.14 million to rehabilitate the viaduct of the station, the Stillwell Station. And in 2001, Coney Island Terminal got a full $310 million reconstruction. The new terminal opened on May 23rd, 2004, and the project was completed on May 29th of 2005. But the success of Coney Island's resurgence is not just because it pays homage to its past. It's also because it brings the best of that past into the future. It offers escape from the rigidity of the mainstream. It celebrates self-expression, something we really need today. And it offers a true and inclusive definition of beauty. And all of these things have been really key to Coney's success from the very beginning. So to close, I would like to read from an essay by Giuseppe Cotella, who was an Italian immigrant and a barber and a writer by trade. And this was published in 1925. He said, quote, "As long as there is a beach or a meadow left, people will gather their bundles and migrate there. That is why Coney Island is a place where man in shackles breaks his bounds. Here he becomes himself. Here he finds the natural expression which makes him kiss his wife or his sweetheart. Here he becomes beautiful because the sun is not denied him." And that is our talk on Coney Island today. I want to thank everyone for listening. I'm going to give it over to Hillary, and we'll be answering some questions later on in the presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Joe, for that really moving tribute to Coney Island and its lasting legacy, and also for all that in-depth research and the incredible selection of images from the Transit Museum archives. It's really fascinating to see how instrumental transit was in shaping the Coney story. Okay, well, we're going to keep moving right along here. So rooted in the traditions of P.T. Barnum, dime museums, burlesque, and vaudeville, Coney Island USA is a multifaceted art center that preserves and performs distinctly American visual and performing arts. This institution showcases the cultural legacy of Coney Island through the Coney Island Museum, the Coney Island Circus Sideshow, the annual Mermaid Parade, the Coney Island Film Festival, and more. So here to take us on a tour of their landmark space is the curator of the Coney Island Museum, Lisa Mangel-Schaefer, and Coney Island USA's artistic director, Adam Ring.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Coney Island Museum. We're gonna head in now. We're gonna meet our curator, so follow me. Friends, I'd like to introduce the curator of the Coney Island Museum right here at Coney Island, USA, Lisa Mangel-Schaefer.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Coney Island Museum. Thank you, Hillary. Thank you to the New York Transit Museum for including the museum in tonight's program. It's very exciting to be here. So I am standing in the middle of our East Gallery, and I am surrounded by these amazing panels that coincidentally came to us from the New York Transit Museum. I absolutely adore these because they give our visitors an amazing timeline of Coney Island's most famous amusement parks: Sea Lion Park, Steeplechase Park, Luna Park, and Dreamland. They also give our visitors information about the critical role that transportation played in the development of Coney Island, as Joe just described to us. And you can see here, you can see there the pictures of the steamboats and trains. And of course, we had the trolley and ultimately the subway. And all these things helped contribute to Coney Island's great popularity. Let's move into the main gallery. So what brought people to Coney Island? As New York City moved into the 20th century, it welcomed waves upon waves of immigrants. Many of them stayed in New York City and settled in the tenements and slums of Manhattan and Brooklyn. The Coney Island beach, that beautiful, pristine Atlantic beachfront, was easily accessible by train and gave these families it was a day trip. It was a respite from the heat of the tenements. And it was an opportunity to relax and be in the country and be in the salt air and the sunshine. So you would take the subway, you would arrive at the Stillwell terminal and make your way down to the beach and stop at one of the many bathhouses. You could rent a locker. Why would you need a locker? To store your clothes after you rented a bathing suit. As you can see here, most folks in the early 20th century did not own their own bathing suits. They rented bathing suits from these bathhouses. They were made of wool. I can't imagine they were particularly comfortable, but that's how it was. Now, besides the bathing suits and the lockers, you could also rent those classic canvas and wood striped beach chairs and the umbrellas, and also those iconic rolling chairs that we always associate with the boardwalk. And those were available for rental at M&C Beach Chair Rental Company. And they operated in Coney Island from 1917 to 1979. Their main office was located right down the block from this museum on West 12th Street. And we were very fortunate to have been given a number of artifacts from that business by the family. And you can see we have the sign here with some of the rates. We have the time clock for people, and we have tickets, selections of tickets. And we have the ticket punch. And we also have a number of tickets from the other bathhouses, Cook's, Stouches, Washington Baths, there were many, and the little tickets and tags you would get when you rented. Many of these beach houses also had pools. They had saunas, steam baths. They served as community centers for local residents. And again, on a hot summer day, as John described, you would get hundreds of thousands of people here on the beach in Coney Island, as you can see in these photographs. It's kind of mind-boggling to imagine so many people in one place. But they were all smiling and they were all having a good time. Now, beside the beach, obviously, people came to Coney Island for the amusements. Coney Island was the birthplace of the outdoor amusement industry in America. The first roller coaster was here in Coney Island. Many of the early carousel manufacturers had their workshops here in Coney Island. Illions, Carmel, Stein, Goldstein, and the Mangles Company all manufactured carousels here. This bell that you see is from one of the earliest carousels that operated in Coney Island in the 1880s. This is a rounding board from a Mangles Kitty carousel. And a lot of these signs are from Coney Island's own beloved B&B carousel, which still operates up on the boardwalk and was built here in Coney Island. Coney Island is also home to the Wonder Wheel, that wonderfully eccentric Ferris wheel with the swinging cars that scares the heck out of people if they aren't expecting it. And that just recently, 2 years ago, celebrated its 100th birthday and is a New York City landmark, as of course is the Cyclone roller coaster, which will also be celebrating its centennial very soon. Coney Island, besides carousels, a lot of other rides and attractions were enjoyed and manufactured here in Coney Island, including kiddie rides and shooting galleries. The Coney Island Museum actually has a working shooting gallery in our arts annex that is on loan to us from the Wuderis family at Dino's Wonder Wheel Park. Another one of Coney Island's most famous rides was the steeplechase ride. Now, steeplechase ride was a gravity ride. 2 people to a horse, as it says on the sign. It gave folks the opportunity to make contact and hold on to someone. You'd get pushed off, you'd go down the hill, you'd go around, and it was a lot of fun. Now, the owner of Steeplechase, George C. Tillieu, he was a very, very clever businessman. And when Steeplechase burned down and was rebuilt in 1904, George built a part of it inside this amazing glass and steel pavilion, the Pavilion of Fun, knowing full well that if it rained, people would be able to ride his rides instead of other parks. And that kind of creepy, leering face, that is the mascot of steeplechase. That is the Tilly face. And you will see that now all throughout Coney Island. It has become synonymous with Coney Island. Now, getting back to that steeplechase ride. So when the ride was done, it would end inside the Pavilion of Fun. And the riders would get out and they would have to walk across a stage in the Blowhole Theater. Now, on the Blowhole Theater were usually a pair of clowns. One of them, known as Freddie the Tramp, who was a character of clown Fred Yockers Sr., and also there was often a small person dressed as a clown. As you walked across the stage, these two guys would harass you. They would taunt you. They would hit you with slapsticks. And that's one of the original slapsticks. Poke you with an electric cat prod. All of this in front of an audience that was watching and laughing. You would be ushered over jets of compressed air, which would blow off the man's hat, blow up the lady's skirt, and people would think this was hysterical. When you finally managed to get off that stage, you would take your seat in the audience and laugh at the next group of people trying to make their way across. Folks, that's entertainment in Coney Island. But speaking of entertainment, I'm going to bring you over to Adam. And he's going to tell you about some other forms of entertainment popular in Coney Island. Thank you.
And thank you, Lisa. Hey, everybody. So as Lisa said, Coney Island has been known for entertainment. As a matter of fact, visitors made Coney Island a destination. They came to be entertained. There were shows ranging from grand spectacles and historic reenactments to animal shows, circus acts, vaudeville, and variety. As a matter of fact, Houdini, the Marx Brothers, and Jimmy Durante all got their start early on in their careers in Coney Island. And a little fun fact right over here, there was a building right around the corner from where we are on Stillwell Avenue called Henderson's. That's where the Marx Brothers started out when they were performing in Coney Island. We date back about 18 years ago, give or take. Coney Island, USA did a couple of mermaid balls in that Henderson's building when it was still up. And I had the chance to perform in that building. I'm not saying that I was on the same stage as the Marx Brothers, but it's certainly a feather in my cap there. So that said, the most important form and one of the most popular forms of entertainment in Coney Island were, of course, the sideshows. Since Victorian times, the public has been fascinated with the bizarre, the unusual, the strange. And in 1904, Samuel Gumpertz, the manager of Dreamland, created both the Midget City and the Dreamland Circus Sideshow. And if we take a look right over here, we can see some of the old vintage postcards of the Midget City. That there is the Midget City Opera House. And right next to it over here is the actual Midget City. Now, when we come within the showcase just a little more, this here is an original photo dating back to 1919 of the banner line of the Dreamland Circus Sideshow. Now, you can see that the sideshows within Coney Island were still thriving even after Dreamland's demise back in 1911. If we look up on the wall over here, we can say that the performers within the sideshows formed a very tight-knit community, like a family, which created a safe space for folks that might otherwise find themselves as outcasts. This here is the Dreamland Social Club from 1924, and right in the center, right over here, that there is the performer William Henry Johnson, otherwise known as Zip the What Is It, or Zip the Pinhead. Now, Coney Island has been home to many other sideshows, including David Rosen's Wonderland show, which was actually located in this building. But unlike the past, many of today's sideshows aren't about displaying people that are born different, but instead focus on performers with unique or unusual skills or talents. And that's where I come in. We run in this building right downstairs out of our Sideshows by the Seashore Theater, the world famous Coney Island Circus Sideshow, where you might be able to see an act that is considered to be the single most daring and dangerous act of a sideshow, and that would be the art known as sword swallowing. Now, I'll give you a little display of what sword swallowing looks like, and I'm going to explain to you exactly how it's done. Now, in order to swallow a sword, you need two things: mind and body control. Now, everybody's got what's called a gag reflex, and that's your body's way of telling you you're putting something down your throat that you probably shouldn't, and I'm talking about a sword. Then there's the mind control. You got to convince yourself that swallowing any amount of steel is an okay thing to do. Now, I'm doing this for about 20 years already. Mind control, it's easy. It's the gag reflex that sometimes trips me up. Hopefully, we will not get anything on the camera. So let's see if I can get the first sword all the way down. Yeah. All right. Now, my friends, we will continue on with something a little bit more daring, a little bit more dangerous, because this is Coney Island after all, where people come for entertainment. This sword over here is the longest sword that I swallow, measuring in at 27 inches. Now, what I'd like to do is explain the path and the science behind where this sword goes when a sword swallower swallows it. Now, the sword goes into the mouth, into the throat, where there's a little trapdoor called the epiglottis. This epiglottis separates the digestive tract, where your food goes, and the respiratory tract, how you breathe. The sword goes all the way down that food tube. Now, a lot of people ask me, Adam, what does it feel like to swallow a sword? Well, I can't really explain what it feels like, but I can give everybody at home a little experiment to try, not with a sword, but with peanut butter, and not if you're allergic to peanut butter. Now, wait till the broadcast ends. Once it ends, grab a big spoonful of peanut butter, no jam, no jelly, no honey, just peanut butter, and lick it right off the spoon. You'll feel that peanut butter slowly moving down your esophagus, which is the same path that the sword takes. Now, the peanut butter is, well, rather the sword is not nearly as soft or as tasty as the peanut butter, but you'll get the idea as to where it's going. Now, the point will be sliding down here, stopping at a little valve. This valve opens up, and the point of the sword is going to touch the bottom of my stomach approximately right over here. Now, at any point during the act, if I were to push that sword down with any amount of force, I'd pop my stomach, causing internal bleeding, passing out in the Coney Island Museum, likely dying as they pick me up off the floor here down a steep flight of steps. Not exactly the way I want to go, but of course, if I could go in any place, it probably would be the Coney Island Museum. That said, if I continue pushing the sword down, I'd probably rip my pants. So right now, let's see if I can get 27 inches of solid steel down the hatch without a scratch. And that, my friends, is how we do it in Coney Island. I can only imagine what the comments are saying now. But that said, we want to wrap up, of course, by letting everybody know that the Coney Island Circus Sideshow right downstairs is keeping this tradition of sideshows alive while we forge a path into the future with our 10-in-1 Circus Sideshow. We're here, we're real, we're alive, and we're giving people that unique experience of this bizarre and fun family-friendly entertainment. So friends, on behalf of the Coney Island Museum, on behalf of Coney Island, USA, many thanks to the New York Transit Museum for including us in this terrific broadcast, and we hope to see all of you in Coney Island. Bye, everybody.
That was absolutely amazing. I think we have to give a special round of applause to Adam for sharing that amazing skill, feat of daring. Fantastic round of applause. And it's really just fascinating to see the collection, how much your collections, I'm not going to do that, but thanks. The collections really capture the spirit and history of Coney. It's just a really amazing museum. I highly suggest going out and checking it out. There's just so many things available on view, way more than was even shown to you tonight. Okay, thank you so much, Jennifer, for presenting that sideshow experience with us. That was great. Okay, now for our last presenter, we have joining us from the Coney Island Brewery is the General Manager, Victoria Petula. As a beer enthusiast and lifelong Coney resident, being able to work and contribute to her community is a dream come true. The brewery is a year-round destination serving fresh, one-of-a-kind beers that can only be found in their tap room. And after a huge expansion in 2019, they now serve food, non-alcoholic beverages, and host all kinds of programming from live music and bingo to drag shows and community markets. She will now be sharing some fun facts about beer, its history, and how it has shaped transportation and civilization.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Coney Island Brewery. As you can see, I am sitting in our actual brewing space. What an act to follow, Adam. Thank you. I do not think I can outdo you, but thanks for that. Never get sick of seeing that. So I want to say cheers. I don't know if the perks of working at a brewery is you can have beer any time of the day. So the reason why we are a part of this call is because we reached out to the Transit Museum to let them know that we are brewing a very special beer called Metro Area that is fresh on tap. As you can see the lovely can label, you can guess what we are highlighting here. This beer is an ode to our favorite form of transportation to Coney, as well as the folks who keep it going. We are the last stop on 4 train lines and have a train and bus depot down the street from us. Shout out to the MTA for keeping New York City moving. This beer is 5.5% ABV and is a refreshing dry hopped Pilsner with notes of floral and citrus, a light cereal green aroma, and a clean, snappy finish. We might be at the end of the line in a very long journey, but what a reward waiting for you at the end. So stop in, grab yourself a 4-pack or a pint. So about us, as everyone's mentioned already, Coney Island is such a unique destination. We have a beach, a boardwalk, sword swallowing, fire breathing, folks cramming 70 hot dogs in their mouths at Nathan's, a historical carousel, oldest wooden roller coaster, and ginormous artifacts of previous world fairs, the Wonder Wheel and the parachute jump. We are where hot dogs, ice cream, and incubators were invented, and where amusement ride creators continue to still test out prototypes today. We try our best to pay homage to Coney's honored tradition of doing things a little bit differently and keeping things exciting. So our brewery was originally located inside Coney Island, USA itself. Folks might not know that. It was considered the smallest brewery in the world and owned by the Schmaltz Brewing Company. After Hurricane Sandy, it struggled to stay afloat and changed ownership and landed in its current location, which is built into Maimonides Stadium, the home of the Cyclones. A few freaky ingredients that we have used in the past to keep things interesting are cotton candy Kolsch, which was a huge hit. For years, we used strawberry puree in it. Our famous Freaktoberfest, which we are currently brewing and will be released in September, is a collaboration brew with Cafe Grumpy from Greenpoint, and is brewed with pumpkin puree, allspice, and espresso beans. Our Boardwalker beer was a black lager brewed with spruce tips, an ode to the boards on the boardwalk. And our first version of Beer Here was brewed as an ode to our sponsorship of the Mets, and brewed with sunflower seeds as a nod to baseball's favorite snack. So some cool stuff. A lot of our favorites and bestsellers have become our flagships. Beers you might be familiar with because you can find them all around the city is Mermaid Pilsner, Merman IPA, our beach beer, which is a Kolsch style, and our newest Parachute Jump Pale Ale. We also had a wonderful beer, Dreamland Sour, which was a personal favorite, an ode to the park that used to exist in Coney Island. All right, so first pop quiz. I hope you guys are ready. I cannot see the chat, but feel free to throw your answers in there. Does anyone know what the 4 main ingredients of beer are? Let's see, test your knowledge. Please submit your answers, but I will give the answers away. First ingredient is water. Second ingredient is malt, which some folks might call grains. Third ingredient is hops, and the fourth and the only living ingredient, live ingredient, is yeast. In the early, just a fun fact, in the early 19th century, the Germans passed a law that is considered the earliest law regulating food safety and protecting consumers. I'm going to butcher it because I'm not German, but Reinheitsgebot was passed to dictate the ingredients that must be used in beer. Back then it was water, barley, and hops. The important role that yeast plays in brewing was only recognized later on in the 19th century. So folks did not understand the role that yeast played. So it was not included in this law. And interestingly, the reason why barley was the chosen grain is to prevent competition of the ingredient with bakers. Bakeries needed wheat. So it was super cool. And knowing that having rules to beer did help result in all very creative new forms and styles of beer. So let's take a look even further back. Where did beer come from? It's hard to say when it was first created, but it can be traced back over 10,000 years, which is amazing. Knowing how old it is, you can begin to understand why folks believed beer was a gift from the gods. Without understanding the process of fermentation, water and grains were just magically transformed into an elixir that changed your state of mind. Water sources were not always clean, and beer was a safe beverage for consumption. It was a source of nutrition to give folks energy to complete very hard work days. Also made jokes funnier, made people more attractive. And some even say it was the driving force for the written word and land ownership. People needed to write down their beer recipes and keep track of the fields where grain was growing to brew more beer. It was consumed not so much for inebriation, even though that probably helped a lot, but rather as a source of sustenance. Over the centuries, drinking was so prevalent that many times workers would request to be paid in beer or alcohol instead of monetary wages. Not today anymore. Beer doesn't pay the bills. I also wanted to touch on a beer topic that is very personally interesting to me, and that is women's role in beer, because not many folks know that we had a lot to do with its existence and production. The original brewing profession back in ancient Mesopotamia was performed by women because we do everything so well and best. And centuries later, it was taken over by men. The oldest surviving beer recipe was actually a Sumerian poem that honored the female patron goddess of brewing, Ninkasi. Something else very cool is in the 1300s, in England, the name alewife and brewster was used for women who brewed beer. There have been parallels drawn, and this is not 100% verified, but I kind of love this fact and pray that it's true. Alewives were thought to be a possible inspiration for witches. When you think of the special point-tipped hats that they wore, the wooden spoons that they used to stir their cauldrons as they boiled beer. And they didn't understand why when they used their special spoon from one batch to the next, it magically created beer because they didn't understand fermentation yet, but that could be seen as a wand. And you think about the presence of cats to keep mice away, and a notorious symbol for a batch of beer being done and an alewife keeping her area and brewery clean was she would put a broom outside of her door when her batch was done. Also can be seen as a symbol of being witch. Unfortunately, and not new to women, females did become the scapegoat for the brewing community as a whole for the vices that the world and the church feared from the production of alcohol. So this is kind of the reason why men took over and women took a step back. The frequent portrayal of alewives being disobedient to their husbands, cheating their customers with watered down ales, and increasing prices, even went as far as associating alewives with sinful behavior and luring men away from the church. So we got pushed out of the profession, but today women are paving their way right back into beer. Great organizations like the Pink Boot Society that we and me personally are members of and support, links females in beer from across the world in support and sharing education and resources to get us back to our glory. So we're coming back and we're making great things. Let me do a time check. I don't have much time, and I know you guys wanted to do some Q&A, so I did want to get into the ingredients and how beer was made, but I guess you guys have to take a trip down to Coney Island to hear it firsthand. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks so much, Victoria, for sharing that amazing history, really unknown history. But what's also fascinating is those early connections between all the different brews and the different places and Coney Island that are really just synonymous with the Coney Island Brewery. So we really wanted to just thank everyone for joining us. I know we don't really have too much time for Q&A. I think possibly if there's 1 or 2 questions, we can try to fit it in using the chat. But in the meantime, I just wanted to first thank everyone for coming and being part of this program. Thank you, Joe, for representing the Transit Museum, Adam and Lisa with Coney Island USA and the Coney Island Museum, and Victoria with Coney Island Brewery. It was so fun to experience this iconic Brooklyn location through all these different vantage points. As we wrap up, please let me know if you have any upcoming programs that you'd like to share or activities to announce to the audience. This might be a good time to let them know what you have coming up.
All right, wow. We are chock full of programming. The Coney Island Circus Sideshow is going to be running Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. We're off Tuesdays and Wednesdays for now. The museum is going to be open Friday through Sunday. We've got evening programming on weekends. We've got assorted programming on Thursday. And we've got great stuff running through the end of October into November as well. And, you know, we're excited. Maybe Vix will talk about that, but we're excited to be hosting Coney Island's first creature crawl along with the Coney Island Brewery. So we're thrilled about that. That's going to happen October 22nd in conjunction with the Alliance for Coney Island and Dino's Wonder Wheel Park and our friends on the block right here on 12th Street. So I hope I didn't take up too much of the time. Check us out at coneyisland.com. Lisa, I think, has something to say.
The museum will also be resuming our Zoom
That's right.
programs in the fall.
That's
So
right.
stay tuned for those.
To have a look for our Ask the Experts online broadcasts, which are going to be going on come fall. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
See you in Coney Island.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks. Anything to add, Victoria?
I believe you asked us what our hours of operation are, right, to share?
Yeah, just anything.
Just anything.
Any
So
program.
I briefly scanned through the chat and I see Jennifer answered that our brewery is located on Surf Avenue, 1904. It's the big stadium between West 17th and West 16th Street. Our beer is available in stores. If you go to our website, which is coneyislandbeer.com, we actually have a beer finder app where you put in your zip code and it will show you the closest store that sells our product, but also the closest bar that pours our product. Our flagships are available, but all the beer that is brewed on site here can only be found here. We are, fingers crossed, hoping to get our Freaktoberfest beer into Whole Foods as a tester this year. So please put good vibes, put energy into the world to make sure that that happens so that everyone can try some of our specialty beer. We are open from Tuesday to Sunday for now in the summertime, noon to 8 p.m. Our kitchen is open until 7 p.m. And for the past few weeks, we have been exploring opening up a cafe in our space. So we are open from 9:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. in our coffee window. So we can serve you coffee before we're open, and all of that coffee is exclusively cafe grown. Stop on in if you're in the neighborhood.
Fantastic. I think everybody should take a subway ride all the way out to Coney, visit the museum, visit the brewery, make a full day of it. Just from the Transit Museum end, I wanted to kind of just give a little announcement for our upcoming program. Next week is a virtual book talk. We are going to be featuring Eric Washington, who's going to join us to talk about his book, Boss of the Grips, The Life of James H. Williams and the Red Caps of Grand Central Terminal. It's a really fascinating story of race, labor, and transit, and it's going to be happening on Williams's actual birthday, August 4th. At 6 p.m. So please register at newyorktransitmuseum.org/programs, and we would love to see you there. And remember, the museum is open. We now have new and expanded hours, so you can join us from Thursday through Sunday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. We'd love to have you join us. Again, you need advanced registration, but there's always room for you at the Transit Museum. Thank you so much for joining us, spending your evening with us, with Coney Island. This is an amazing story and history. Thank you. We hope to see you next time. Bye all.